Hello and welcome for you joining me, and I'm in the middle of DAF 68 Omid A of Chullin Talmud Bakri and the Steinsaltz edition. I'm going to dive straight in. The Gemara asks, and concerning this latter clause itself, what does it teach us? Does it teach that once a fetus extended its head, that is considered a birth? We've already learned in the Mishnah Brachot 46a who is considered firstborn with regard to inheritance. So the footnote, the father's firstborn son is given an extra share of the inheritance. See Deuteronomy 21:17. This privilege is granted even if he is not the mother's firstborn son, and even if he is a mamzer. The firstborn son's share is twice the size of that received by each of the other sons, and is given only from property actually present in the estate at the time of the father's death, not from property accruing to the estate later, which is divided equally among its heirs, but is not considered a firstborn. B'choros, the Torah states, sanctify to me every firstborn, whatever opens a womb among the children of Israel, both of man and of animal, it is mine. Exodus 13:2. In practical terms, the sanctity of the firstborn son is limited to the obligation to redeem him from the priest for 5 pieces of silver, and that's Exodus 13:30 and Numbers 18:15-16. Similarly, the Torah requires all firstborn male donkeys to be redeemed by giving a lamb to a priest in exchange for them. If the donkey is not redeemed, its neck must be broken. And see Exodus 13:13 with regard to the requirement to be redeemed by giving 5 shekels to the priest. A son born following a miscarriage does not have a firstborn status with regard to the requirement of redemption. By contrast, with regard to inheritance, it does of firstborn status, even if the miscarried fetus had initially emerged but it had not reached its full term, or if it had reached its full term but was stillborn. This is according to the Mishnah Brachos 46a. The halacha in the case when the entire fetus emerged is subject to dispute between the latter commentaries. In the case of a non-viable newborn that died immediately after its head emerged, a son born afterward does not have the status of the firstborn, either with regard to redemption or with regard to inheritance, and that's from the Rambam, Sefer Zeraim, Hilchot Bekum 11:15, and Sefer Mishpatim, Hilchot Nachalot 2:10, Shulchan Aruch Yerodea, and 5:2, and Hilchot Mishpat 277:6. The status of the firstborn with regard to the requirement to redeem it is derived from the verse, sanctify to me all of whatever opens the womb, Exodus 13:2. In phrase, whoever opens the womb indicates that the status of the firstborn is applied only to the first child to issue from the mother's womb. Therefore, even a miscarriage would preclude a subsequent child from having firstborn status in this regard. By contrast, with regard to inheritance, where the firstborn receives a double portion, the verse states, for he is the first fruits of his strength. Oh no. The right of the firstborn, it says Deuteronomy 21:17. The term his strength, is interpreted as being associated with mourning and a nut. And so it indicates that the firstborn status in this respect is given to the first child over which the father would mourn were it to die. This is understood to be limited to a child that is born alive. See Rashi cited in Baba Batra 111a. Accordingly, even that child were preceded by a stillbirth, it would be considered the firstborn for the purposes of inheritance. If a son who came after miscarriage of an undeveloped fetus, it is the son who came after the miscarriage of an undeveloped fetus. The Mishnah adds that the category of stillbirth includes the case of a child who did not reach full term, even if his head emerged alive. The novelty of this statement is that despite the fact that the child's head emerged while it was still alive, since it did not reach full term and it died before having been fully born, it does not preclude a subsequent child from having firstborn status. The statement applies only to firstborn status with regard to inheritance. With regard to redemption, even if the child was dead at the time its head emerged, a subsequent child would not be considered the firstborn. See Brachot 46a. Or fully developed 9-month-old fetus whose head emerged dead. The Gemara inferred from the final clause of the Mishnah, the reason a son born following a miscarriage is considered firstborn with regard to inheritance is that the head of the miscarriage emerged only after it was already dead. But if its head had initially emerged alive, even if it then died before being fully delivered, the son born after him would not be considered the firstborn even with regard to inheritance. Apparently, This is because the emergence of the head alive is considered a birth, and therefore any typical child cannot be considered the firstborn. Evidently, it is necessary for the Mishnah here to teach this definition of birth. Birth. And if you would say that the Mishnah there teaches us the definition of birth is God of a person, and the Mishnah teaches us that the same definition applies to an animal, another problem remains, as the Gemara will presently explain. Before explaining the problem with this suggestion, the Gemara explains why it is necessary to teach the definition with regard to both people and animals. Because the definition of birth with regard to a person cannot be derived from that of an animal, as the animal does not have a concealed opening, a prot's door. What's a prot's door? Perot's door. Many commentaries maintain the proper spelling of this word prosdod. In any event, the term is derived from Greek, apparently from prostas, meaning entrance room, gatehouse, and the like. The word is used by the sages in reference to certain architectural structures, as well as euphemistically referred to female genitalia. Here it refers to the inner thighs, which cover the opening of the vagina in humans, but not in animals. And there's a picture here of a colonnaded entrance hall from a tomb in Cyprus in the 4th century BCE to the womb, unlike women whose thighs conceal the opening to their womb. Consequently, even if the definition was stated with regard to an animal, one might limit it to animals, as that stage is immediately visible, whereas in a woman it is not. And conversely, the definition of birth with regard to an animal cannot be derived from that of a person, as the form of a person's face is significant because people are created in the image of God, and their faces bear the mark of their intelligence, which is not true of animals. Consequently, perhaps the emergence of the head alone is considered a birth only with regard to a person. The Gemara proceeds to explain why the above suggestion is not a solution. With regard to this halacha also, the emergence of the head of the animal is considered a birth. We have already learned it in our Mishnah 77a. If part of a placenta emerged, so there's a footnote here in the placenta, a shilia. A placenta is a mass filled with blood vessels affixed to the wall of the uterus, through which, by way of the umbilical cord, the fetus is nourished. Shortly after birth, usually within the first hour, the placenta separates from the uterus and is expelled from the body. The existence of a placenta is clear evidence that a woman or female animal was pregnant. Such an indication is important when there is uncertainty whether there had been a birth, which is relevant for the halakha of impurity and for defining whether subsequent offspring will have the state of a firstborn. If the placenta is expelled, and even if there is no fetus present, it is assumed that either it was delivered and then taken away, or it never developed properly and therefore is not discernible. And here's a terracotta model of a placenta from the Roman period. Emerged. If part of the placenta emerged from the womb, the consumption of the entire placenta is prohibited in accordance with the ruling of the Mishnah 77a and the Rambam Sefer Kedush Hilchot Machalot Sod 1513. Even after the mother animal is slaughtered, the reason for this, as the placenta is an indication of the presence of a fetus in a woman, so too is an indication of the presence of a fetus in an animal. Consequently, it is possible that the part of the placenta that emerged contained the head of the fetus, and accordingly it would be considered to have been born. The slaughter of the mother animal would therefore not permit it for consumption. Evidently, it is unnecessary for the Mishnah here to teach the definition of a birth, even with regard to an animal. The Gemara has established the last clause does not teach any novelty. Accordingly, it returns to challenging Rav's ruling. Granted, the Mishnah is understood if you say that the statement of the fetus brought its foreleg back inside the mother animal, which is mentioned in the first clause of the Mishnah, is written specifically in order to teach the novelty that the foreleg is permitted if it was brought back or closed in contrast to Rav's ruling. If so, one can claim the Mishnah taught in the latter clause due to the first clause. So they would be parallel stylistically, and no novelty is necessary in the latter clause. And if the first clause is not written specifically and does not teach a novelty, but rather the Mishnah is referring to the permitted state of the rest of the fetus, which is permitted even if it does not bring back its foreleg, and you also say the latter clause is not written specifically to teach novelty since the definition of birth is already told in the Mishnah elsewhere, why then does it need to teach the halacha that the foreleg or head was brought back at all? Therefore, the first clause must be referring to the permitted state of the foreleg and limiting it specifically to the case where it was brought back inside. This context Rav's ruling. The Gemara responds, no. Actually, the Mishnah is referring to the permitted status of the rest of the fetus. But nevertheless, the statement of the fetus is brought back its foreleg does teach a novelty. This is similar to the ruling which Rav Nahum bar Yitzchak said, an explanation of a ruling in a bright side below, that it is necessary only with regard to locating a cut limb on the fetus's body. If the foreleg were to be severed at precisely the point that it lay on the boundary between the inside and the outside of the womb, locating the cut of the fetus's body would also be prohibited. Here too one can explain that the ruling is necessary only with regard to the location of the cut. According to this, when the Mishnah states, if the fetus extended its foreleg and then brought it back, the consumption is permitted. The permitted status not of the limb but of the location of the cut. The limb that left the wound is certainly prohibited. And once the fetus is permitted, the location of the cut is unique in that when the limb was still outside of the womb, it can lay on the boundary of the womb, and so is considered neither to be inside nor then fully left it. Consequently, if at the time the slaughter limb was still outside the womb, then since at that time the location of the cut was not enclosed inside the womb, it would not be permitted by virtue of the mother's slaughter. Nevertheless, ultimately it never fully left the womb, and if it returned inside, the mother's slaughter was not permitted. Rashi Naran. Interesting. And if it teaches that, if the fetus does not bring back its foreleg, then not only is the foreleg prohibited, but the location of the cut is also prohibited. The Gemara suggests, come and hear a challenge to Rav's ruling from a Braita. If an animal is encountering difficulty giving birth, and as a result the fetus extended its leg outside the mother's body and then brought it back inside, and then afterward one slaughtered its mother, its consumption is permitted by virtue of the slaughter of the mother animal. If one first slaughtered its mother and only after did the fetus return its foreleg inside, its consumption is prohibited. If the fetus extended its foreleg outside and one cut it off, before the mother was slaughtered, it is prohibited to consume the part of the limb that was cut off. It also imparts impurity like an animal carcass and is regarded as a limb from a living animal. The rest of the fetus is richly pure and permitted to be consumed as stated in the Braita. That's from the Rambam. And for Kedush Hilchad Machal at the Surat 5:11, and Sefer Tahara Hilchad Sheh HaBatuma 2:9 Shulchan Yodeh 14:2. And then afterward, one slaughters its mother. Then the part of the foreleg that was outside and was cut off is richly impure, and its consumption is prohibited. Since at the time the limb was cut, the fetus was alive, the limb is considered a limb from a living animal, which imparts rich impurity, as does a carcass. See 128b. And as the status of the limb cut from the living animal, which is forbidden. And the rest of the fetus that was inside is richly pure, and its consumption is permitted by virtue of the slaughter of the mother animal. If one slaughtered the mother and only afterward cut off the foreleg that had been extended outside, then the flesh of both the mother and the fetus, excluding the foreleg, is impure due to contact with the carcass. Since the foreleg of the now dead fetus was not permitted through an act of slaughtering, it is regarded as a carcass. It therefore imparts impurity to the rest of the flesh with which was in contact with it. This is the statement of Rabbi Meir. And the rabbis say that the slaughter of the mother animal does not permit the consumption of the foreleg. It does serve to prevent the foreleg from imparting its impurity of a carcass. Accordingly, the flesh has the status in contact with the slaughtered terefa. There's a footnote here, and if an animal encountered difficulty giving birth and the fetus reached a limb outside the womb, and then that limb was cut off after its mother's slaughter, if the limb is regarded as a terefa that was slaughtered, the limb is regarded as a terefa that was slaughtered. Therefore, by rabbinic law, it imparts impurity to consider the item but does not render to remain impure. The rest of the fetus is regarded as food that came in the contact with the slaughtered terefa. This is according to the opinion of the rabbis. Rambam Sefer Kedush Hilchad Machal at the Surat 5:11 Shulchan Yodeh 14:2. Excuse me. By Torah law, consumption of an animal is prohibited, but it does not impart racial impurity. They decreed it to be impure, that it disqualifies sacrificial flesh with which it comes into contact. The Gemara explains the challenge to Rav's ruling. In any event, the first clause of the Braita teaches if the fetus extended its foreleg outside the mother animal, mother animal's body and then brought it back inside, and then afterward one slaughtered its mother, its consumption is permitted. What is it not referring to the limb, either foreleg, and the brighter rules that it is permitted in the context of our ruling? The Gemara responds no, it's referring to the rest of the fetus. The Gemara questions this: if the Bryce is referring to the fetus, they allow to close the one first slaughtered its mother, and only afterward the fetus returns foreleg inside. The Gemara explains the question: referring to the fetus, why should it be prohibited in this case? The Gemara answers: the Bryce is referring to the fetus and should be explained in a manner similar to that which Rav Naaman bar Yitzchak said in explanation of a ruling in the Bryce cited below, that it is necessary only with regard to the location of the cut limb on the fetus's body. If the foreleg was severed at precisely the point that lay on the boundary between the inside and the outside when it was extended outside the womb, the location of the cut on the fetus's body is also prohibited. Here too, one can explain that this ruling is necessary only with regard to the location of the cut. And it teaches that if the fetus does not return its foreleg, then not only is the foreleg prohibited, but the location of the cut is prohibited as well. It's prohibited even if it was brought back inside before the slaughter. The Gemara asks, is that so? But when Avimi came from Ben Hosai, this is an Aramaic name for the area of the Persian kingdom surrounded by the confluence of the Tigris and the Euphrates rivers. Nowadays it is known as Khuzestan, which is derived from the original name Hosai. This area was so distant from the center of Jewish life in Babylonia that the trip between them took several months. Despite this, due to the strong business relation between Ben Hosai, Babylonia, and Eretz Yisrael, there was a constant interaction between these places. He came and brought a biter with him. One of the sources, see 69a, that the slaughter of a pregnant animal also serves to permit the consumption of a fetus in the verse. And every animal that has a split hoof and is cloven into two hoofs chews the cud. Of the animals you may eat, Deuteronomy 14:6. The verse mentions both hoof in the singular and hooves in the plural, to teach that sometimes one may eat two hooves and sometimes only one, as follows. If the fetus extended two of its hooves outside the womb, if it returned one hoof, one may eat. If it brought back both hooves, one may eat. What is it not that the Brisa means that if one brought back one hoof, one may eat that hoof, and likewise if it brought back both hooves, one may eat both of them, in contradiction to our ruling? The Gemara responds no. It means that if one brought back one hoof, or even both, one may eat the rest of the fetus, but not the hooves. The Gemara objects: if it is referring to the permitted state of the fetus, why does it specifically state that it brought back the hoof? Even if it did not bring back the fetus would be permitted. Rav Naaman bar Yitzchak said the ruling of the Brisa is necessary only with regard to the location of the cut limb on the body of the fetus. If the limb were to be severed at precisely the point that lay on the boundary between the inside and the outside when it was extended outside the womb, then the location of the cut on the fetus's body would also be prohibited, but only if the fetus had not been brought back that limb before the animal was slaughtered. The Gemara persists. But even given Rav Naaman bar Yitzchak's claim, the Brisa adduces two verses, i.e. the mention of hoof and hoofs. What is it not that one serves to permit the limb in contradiction to Rav's ruling, and the other serves to permit the location of the cut in accordance with Rav Naaman bar Yitzchak's ruling? The Gemara responds no. One mentioned does not serve to permit the location of the cut, but the other one serves to permit the fetus with non-cloven hooves, a kalut. What's a kalut? In this context, kalut means attached or intermingled. The term may be related to the word miklat, refuge, a closed place where one can hide, found inside the womb of a cow. This fetus developed with hooves that are not fully cloven. Instead, the two toes are fused together. Since the verse that teaches a fetus is permitted through the slaughter of its mother refers to a fetus with a hoof, using the singular form, it teaches that even a fetus with such a hoof is permitted. If a kosher animal gave birth to an offspring that resembles a non-kosher animal, it is permitted for consumption despite the fact that its hooves are not wholly cloven and does not chew its cud. The halacha is according to the opinion of rabbis who disagree with Rabbi Shimon. On 4 Shulchan Aruch 79.2. Although the fetus is not by the distinguishing characteristics of a kosher species, nevertheless permitted by virtue of its slaughter of its mother. And it is necessary to have a specific source to permit this according to the opinion of Rabbi Shimon. As Rabbi Shimon says, a calf with non-cloven hooves bought from a kosher cow. Sometimes an offspring of two cloven-hoofed animals is born with a defect of syndactyl, i.e. non-cloven hooves. Despite the fact that genetically it is certainly a specimen of a kosher species, this offspring lacks one of the two signs of a kosher animal. Forbidden as a calf does not bear the significant characteristics of a kosher species. The verse teaches that this matter applies only when the fetus emerged into the airspace of the world, i.e. it was born before the mother animal was slaughtered, and if it was still inside its mother's womb, when the mother was slaughtered, is permitted. The Gemara attempted the challenge by ruling that once a limb of fetus extended outside the mother animal's body, it becomes prohibited, even if it was then brought back, but did not find a conclusive refutation. It now presents a dissenting opinion. All it says that Rabbi Yochanan says, and if the limb itself is permitted by virtue of the slaughter of the mother animal. Rabbi Yehuda said to Ula, but Rav and Shmuel both say the limb itself is prohibited. How can you say otherwise? Ula said to him, who will give us some of the dust of the graves of Rav and Shmuel, and will we fill our eyes with it? Such is the greatness of those sages. But I follow the opinion of Rabbi Yochanan, and this is what Rabbi Yochanan says. Initially, one would assume all flesh is permitted due to it being within a certain boundary, e.g. a fetus inside its mother's womb, the flesh of offerings of the most sacred order within the temple courtyard, and the flesh of offerings of lesser sanctity within Jerusalem, was included in the verse, and flesh in the field at Tereva you shall not eat in Exodus 22:30. The verse is interpreted to teach that if such flesh leaves its boundaries, it is then forbidden, even if it should subsequently return. Once another verse applies the concept for you specifically with regard to a sin offering, a chatos, in a case where one unwittingly commits a transgression punishable by kari, if performed intentionally, he is obligated to bring a sin offering. A sin offering brought by an individual is either a female lamb or female goat less than 1 year old. It must be slaughtered in the northern section of the temple courtyard and its blood received there. The blood of the sin offering is placed at each of the four corners of the altar, while the fats are burned on the altar and its meat is eaten by the priest. All the sin offerings are brought in certain cases as part of the purification rites and conclusion of a period of ritual impurity, e.g. a woman's given birth. There are yet another sin offerings that serve to atone for the community, as well as special sin offerings brought by the leaders to be able to atone for their transgressions. The requirement to burn an offering that went out of its boundary is derived from the rebuke given by Moses to Aaron and his sons for the burning the sin offering on the 8th day of the inauguration of the tabernacle instead of eating it. In Leviticus 10:17-20, the Gemara in Devachim 101a expounds that Moses suggested to them that perhaps they burn the sin offering because it had left its boundary. They responded that it had not. This indicates that if it had left its boundary, there would have been a requirement to burn it. Teaching that if it went outside its boundary and returned, it is prohibited in Leviticus 10:18. Then it is apparent that the most one specifically applied to a sin offering. In regard to all other offerings that left their boundary, once they brought back, they are permitted, including the limb of a fetus, then outside the womb and then was brought back. The Gemara raised an objection to the opinion of by Yochanan from Baita. It is derived from the verse, and flesh in the field at Tereva you shall not eat. That flesh that leaves the boundary in which is permitted is thereby rendered forbidden like a Tereva. Why must the verse state it is like a Tereva? The Bryce explains, since we find with regard to second tithe, Master Shani, this tithe is set aside after teruma has been given to the priest, and the first tithe to the Levite. Second tithe is separated during the first, second, fourth, and fifth years of the sabbatical cycle and in the time of the temple. After the second tithe was separated, brought to Jerusalem and eaten there by its owner. If the journey to Jerusalem was long, when doing transport of the produce that difficult, or if the produce became ritually impure, it could be redeemed for an equivalent sum of money. If the owner redeemed his own produce, he was obligated to add 1/5 of its value to the price of redemption. He would then take the money to Jerusalem, where it was spent on food to be eaten within the city walls. On the first fruits, Bikurim, each year the first fruits A picture here. The first fruits of the new harvest were given to the priests. Deuteronomy 26, 1 to 11. When the temple stood, the farmer would select the first fruits of the 7 types of fruit with which Eretz Yisrael is especially favored: wheat, barley, grapes, figs, pomegranates, olives, and dates. Deuteronomy 88. By rabbinic decree, at least 1/60th of the harvest must be brought as first fruits. The farmer would bring these fruits to the temple in a basket, placement the coin, and would set a declaration of appreciation to God. See Deuteronomy 26, 3 to 10. After the fruit was given to the priest and eaten under the same provisions that govern Terumah, the first fruits were brought to the temple between the festivals of Shavuot and Sukkot. If they were not brought within this period, an extension was granted until Hanukkah. An entire chapter of the Mishnah and Bikurim is devoted to the halakha and practices governing this mitzvah. And even though they went outside of their boundary, with regard to meat of offerings of the most sacred order, I said this. Which is the city of Jerusalem, and the only place where it's permitted to eat them. Nevertheless, if they are brought back to, they are once again permitted. One might have thought that also with regard to this prohibition, that of the flesh that it leaves its boundary, it is so. If it is brought back, it once again becomes permitted for consumption. Therefore, the verse states, Turefa. The Gemara clarifies. What is the biblical derivation from the term Turefa? Rabbi said this verse indicates that the prohibition of the flesh that left its boundary is like the prohibition of a Turefa. Just with regard to a Turefa, once an animal is mortally wounded, rendering it a Turefa, it can no longer regain its permitted status. So too with regard to flesh prevented in the verse. Once it has gone outside its boundary, with regard to the meat of offerings of the most sacred order that was taken outside of the wall of the temple courtyard, and of offerings of this thing that were taken outside the wall of Jerusalem, even if they are brought back in, they are disqualified and the consumption is permanently prohibited. The halacha is in accordance with the ruling on the Baita, and no the opinion of Rabbi Yochanan. I'm a Sefer Avoda. 11:6. It can no longer gain permitted status. Accordingly, if the limb of a fetus was extended outside the womb, it would thereby be permanently prohibited, contradicting the opinion of Ullah and Rabbi Yochanan. The Gemara concludes, the refutation of the statement of Ullah: if a fetus extended its foreleg and brought it back, consuming the portion of the limb that left the wound is not permitted by slaughter of the mother. When it was not brought back, then the location of the cut where it would be cut from the body is also prohibited. The halacha is in accordance with the opinion of Rav, and Rabbi Yochanan's ruling is contradicted by the Baita. Indeed, a conclusive refutation. The Gemara analyzes the Baita, which states the Master said, since we find with regard to the second tithe and first fruits that although they left their boundary, if they are brought back, they are again permitted. The Gemara asks, and where did we find this? What is the source for the halacha? The Gemara explained that it's written, you may eat within your gate the tithe of your grain, of your wine, and of your oil, of your firstborn, of the herd of your flock, nor of any vows that you have vowed, nor your voluntary offerings, nor the offerings of your hand, but you shall eat them before the Lord your God. Deuteronomy 12:17-18. The phrase the tithe of your grain, or of your wine, or of your oil is referring to the second tithe. The phrase the offering of your hand is referring to first fruits. The verse states that all the items listed may only be eaten before the Lord your God within the city of Jerusalem. The prohibition stated in the verse is that within your gates outside of Jerusalem you may not eat these items. But by inference, if these items went outside of their boundary, outside Jerusalem, and then were brought back, they are permitted. The Gemara explains the dispute between Rav and Rabbi Yochanan in the way in which it was taught in Babylonia. The Gemara notes that in the West, which you saw, they taught the dispute like this. Rav says that there is a concept of birth with regard to limbs. When a limb is extended outside the womb, it is considered born and independent of the mother animal. It can never be permitted by virtue of slaughter of the mother animal. And Rabbi Yochanan says that there is no concept of birth with regard to limbs. If the feet extend a foreleg from the womb, even if most of the foreleg left the womb, only that part is forbidden, while the rest of the limb is permitted. The halacha is according to the opinion of Rabbi Yochanan, as presented in the version of the dispute taught in Eretz Yisrael, and as explained by the Rif. Although with regard to the limb itself, the halacha is according to the opinion of Rav. This is because the Braita contradicts the opinion of Rabbi Yochanan, but Rabbi Yochanan's opinion was not contradicted with regard to his claim that there was no bread for limbs. Therefore, one followed the principle that halacha is according to the opinion of Rabbi Yochanan in his disputed Rav. Mazev Kadush Hilchan Machal the Suet 5:10. See the Mishnah. Magid there. Shulchan Aruch Yodeh 14:2. Since the limb is never considered to have been born, as long as it decided the mother animal, when the mother animal is slaughtered, it will be permitted by virtue of that slaughter. The Gemara asks, what is the difference between Rashi and Rabbeinu Gershom Mo Hagola? Explaining the Gemara is asking what the difference between the two versions of Rav's opinion. With regard to Rabbi Yochanan's opinion, there is no practical difference between the two versions of a statement. The statements there is no concept of birth with regard to limbs, and the limb itself is permitted to have the same meaning. The commentaries raise several difficulties with its interpretation, primarily that the Gemara does not state explicitly between this version and that version, as it often does in such cases. See e.g. Nidda 3a. Therefore, the Rosh prefers the explanation of Rabbeinu Hananel and the Rif, which is that the Gemara's question concerns the difference between the opinions of Rav and Rabbi Yochanan of the Torah and Eretz Yisrael. According to these commentaries, the dispute as taught in Eretz Yisrael is not referring to the limb that was brought back inside the womb, but to a limb of which only the majority was extended outside the womb, and the dispute concerns whether the minority remaining inside or is permitted or not. And that's from the Ramban. These two versions explain why Rav deemed the limb forbidden. The Gemara answers, the practical difference between them is in a case in which only the majority of the limb was extended outside the womb. In that case, the issue is whether or not to prohibit a minority of the limb not made inside. If the limb is forbidden because it is considered to have been born, then it will be forbidden and not just the part that was extended. If the limb is forbidden because it left its boundary, then only the part that extended outside the womb would be forbidden. As the limb was raised before the sage, according to the statement of the one who says that there is no concept of birth with regard to limbs, Rashi explains that this dilemma was raised only with regard to the opinion of Rabbi Yochanan, as according to Rav, the obvious that bringing back the limb is of no consequence in this case, says Rashi. If the fetus extended its foreleg outside the womb and brought it back and again, it extended. And the fetus extended its foreleg outside the womb and brought it back inside the womb, and again extended another limb and brought it back, and so on. Most of the fetus had left the womb. The minority portion that had not left the womb is still permitted. This is according to the principle that when the Gemara raises a dilemma on the stage, if you want to say concerning one of the options, the halacha is in accordance with that option. But if one separately each limb as it emerged, once the majority of the animal has emerged, the higher fetus is forbidden. The reason is that this dilemma is left unresolved by the Gemara, and therefore the halacha is to be seen in Shulchan Aruch Yodeh 14:4. And its other foreleg outside and brought it back, and continued to extend parts of its body outside until the total amount had been outside the womb, constituted the majority of the fetus. Well, halacha. Do we say that ultimately the majority of the fetus has left the womb, and the fetus should be regarded as having been born, and consequently the slaughter of his mother can no longer permit being consumed? Or perhaps since it brought each limb back, the limbs are considered to have been brought back, therefore the majority of the fetus is not considered to have left the womb and is not considered to have been born. In that case, the slaughter of his mother was still permitted for it to be consumed. The Gemara asks, and if you want to say that since it brought back each limb, they are considered to have been brought back, and the majority of the fetus is not considered to have left the womb, the following dilemma still arises. If the fetus extended its foreleg outside and someone severed it, and again extended its other foreleg outside and someone severed it, and this continued with the other limbs until the total amount outside the womb constitutes the majority of the fetus, do we say that since the majority of the fetus left the womb, the entire fetus should be regarded as they've been born, and with the slaughter of the mother can no longer permit it? Or perhaps in order for the fetus to be regarded as having been born, we require a majority of the fetus to leave simultaneously, which does not exist in this case. The Gemara says, come and hear proof from a Mishnah, and that begins the next Amud. Thank you very much for listening, and I wish you all the best. Shabbat Shalom. Bye.